Hey everyone, welcome to tonight's live stream about breeding readiness. This is the second in a series of 3 live streams that I'm doing. I did the first one last Monday night, and we'll be doing the third one next Monday night, same time, same place. And tonight, what I am going to talk about is breeding readiness. We're going to talk about how do you know when your doe is ready, your buck is ready, what heat cycles look like, timing, common pitfalls, and then some key takeaways for you. What you do right now is going to have a big influence on what happens 5 months from now, or 5 months from whenever you breed your goat, or whenever you would like to breed your goat. So we're going to talk about some common mistakes. And first of all, let's talk about how do you know when your doe is ready to be bred. The main question that I get for this is people ask, how old does my doe have to be before she's bred? And that's really not the best question. Like, age is important. Like, you want her to be at least 7 months old, but that's only half of the picture. When I got started, I always heard everybody talking about breeding your goats to kid as yearlings. And so around 7 or 8 months, you just bred them all. Nobody talked about size. And I learned this lesson the hard way. When I had a goat that was growing very small. This is back when we had a lot of parasite problems back in the early 2000s, because there had not been enough research done at that point. So people didn't really know how they were supposed to be dealing with parasites. And so this doe's growth had been stunted because she had had a serious problem with parasites. And thank goodness I did not feel right breeding her when she was 7 or 8 months old, because I realized she was so much smaller than all of the other goats. And so I waited, but not long enough. When she was a little over a year old, I thought, well, everybody else has been bred, so it's definitely time for you to be bred. And so I bred her. And she went into labor on Christmas Eve. And we wound up spending Christmas Day at 2:00 in the morning at the vet's office with her. After the kid was out, she was on an exam table that's got a scale on it. And I did not notice before the kid was out, but after the kid was out, I realized that she weighed 35 pounds. And so I emailed one of my mentors at that time and told her, and she's like, oh my goodness, I wouldn't have even bred a goat that weighed 35 pounds. That's the first time I ever heard about that. And yet that is a huge problem. And I've seen that multiple times. Sometimes it's because of an accidental breeding, but sometimes people just don't know that size is much more important than age. I've seen multiple people have to have a C-section if a goat was less than 30 pounds. Actually, I don't know anyone who has had a doe successfully give birth if she was less than 30 pounds. Those goats have always wound up with C-sections. In my experience, somebody contacted me one time. She called, and her goat had been pushing and she had been pulling for 2 hours. And I said, and when it came out that this doe was only 10 months old, I asked what she weighed, and she said 27 pounds. And I said, you got to call a vet and get a C-section, because there's no way a 27-pound goat is going to give birth to a kid. So she did. And she actually didn't have a vet. So this is why I always tell people, like, you need to have a vet. It took her so long to find a vet. And then she had to drive over 2.5 hours to get the goat there. This kid was born by C-section 8 hours after she started pushing, and it was alive. It had a head that looked like a grapefruit because it had been, because the doe had been pushing and this woman had been pulling for 2 hours before she called me and then called the vet. And so the head was just enormous. It was horribly swollen. And like I said, it looked like a grapefruit. And I was like, oh my God, I had never seen anything like that. I was like, oh my gosh, is it going to be okay? And she's like, oh yeah, they said it'll be fine. The swelling should go down within a couple of days. And it did. And the kid lived happily ever after. So this is why when people say, I don't have time to call a vet, that is not true 99% of the time. If you have a doe in labor, I've driven multiple goats 2 hours to the University of Illinois Vet Hospital for either a C-section or other intervention, and usually with excellent outcomes as long as I'm driving down there with kids that are viable to begin with. Like if you have a schistosomus, that is an inside-out kid, not viable. It is not going to live, and you need a C-section for that because it is like folded in half backwards. And so it's not like the nice little torpedo shape that it needs to be to come out. So it's really important that your goat weigh enough before you actually breed her. And what is enough? The standard for sheep and goats is that a doe should weigh about 2/3 of her adult weight before you breed her. And that is, we're talking there about goats that are like, yes, less than a year old, because they're still growing very fast. So Nigerian dwarfs, you figure, are going to be like about 60 to 70 pounds when they are fully grown. And so you want them to be at least 40 pounds before you breed them. And that is assuming that they are going to keep growing really fast because they're under a year old. So by the time they actually give birth, they'll be over 50 pounds. And so you've got a pretty decently sized goat there that's going to be able to give birth to a normal sized kid. It is absolutely not true that your goat's body will not let a kid grow too big. That is a complete fallacy. And somebody on our website recently said, gave a horse example and said that, you know, all you have to do is look at this cross between this big breed of horse and little breed of horse. And the problem with that is that supposedly in horses, they think that somehow the uterus controls the size of the fetus. Well, there's only one fetus with horses. With goats, you can have 2, 3, 4, even 5 or 6 fetuses. And so there is no restriction on how big that uterus can get. In fact, we have had 8 sets of quintuplets. And usually my goats do not have a bunch of little eensy 2-pounders because their nutrition is really excellent, especially, you know, when they're carrying multiples and stuff. And so when I have had multiple goats carrying 15 pounds of kids. Okay. The average weight of the quintuplets is frequently 3 pounds, and that adds up to 15 pounds. Now, there is no way that a Nigerian dwarf could give birth to 2 kids that added up to 15 pounds, because that'd be 7.5 pounds each. So please do not fall for the fallacy that a goat is not going to have kids any bigger than what she can deliver, because that's just not true. And so also you want to make sure that your buck is either the same breed or a smaller breed. Quite a few years ago, in my early years of helping somebody, there was a woman who had purchased unregistered goats. Now, she was brand new, so she had no idea how big a goat of a certain age was supposed to be. So she bought Nigerian does, and she bought what the seller told her was 99% Nigerian. And she didn't know what size a Nigerian was supposed to be when he was a few months old. And so she used him to breed her doe. And as the goat's pregnancy progressed, the buck just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And she contacted me and said, I don't think this is a purebred Nigerian because he's gotten really big. And indeed, he was not. He was half something, like half or something that had erect ears, because he did have, erect ears, which a Nigerian has. But her goat wound up with a C-section because she was carrying a 7-pound kid, which I have never heard of a Nigerian giving birth to a 7-pound kid vaginally. And so And even if I did, I would still say don't do it, because once you get over 5 pounds with Nigerians, you are getting into very questionable territory in terms of whether or not it's safe. I have only had a handful of goats give birth to kids that were over 5 pounds. Some were fine. However, we had one that almost bled to death from internal tearing, and she had no assistance. Like, she pushed the kid out on her own, but it was covered with blood, and she mentally checked out as soon as the kids were born. And so I wound up taking her to the University Vet Hospital, where she stayed for a week because she almost bled to death. And they said that we should not breed her again because scar tissue, the vagina is what is like just inside the vulva of a goat. And then the cervix and the uterus is above that. And it was actually an internal vaginal tear, not a cervix or uterine tear. And they said that the vaginal tears are actually much worse about re-tearing subsequently. So they said if perchance she accidentally got pregnant or something, that we should probably bring her in for an elective C-section, which is getting close to her due date, because if she tried to give birth again naturally, that she would probably have another really bad hemorrhage. And so anyway, we're happy to say we never had a problem with an accidental breeding with her. She stayed with us for the rest of her natural life, wound up milking for 3 years, and was one of the goats that got me very interested in extended lactations with my Nigerians. So before I go on to the next one, there's a couple questions. Just hellos. Okay. Hi, guys. So the next thing about doe's readiness that we want to talk about is that you do not want them to be too thin or overweight. We talked about this a little bit last week, because last week was all about nutrition. And what happens if a doe is too thin or overweight when she gets pregnant is, well, first of all, she's too thin. She's going to have trouble giving the nutrients to the kids that they need without robbing her body. So every goat's a little different in terms of how they're going to allocate their resources. So, and you have no control over that. If she's underweight, maybe her body's just going to hang on to what it's got and the babies are going to die and she's going to miscarry. Or maybe her body is going to, try to give everything to the kids, and then the doe is going to wind up really sick and possibly dead. Goats that are either underweight or overweight towards the end of pregnancy tend to be at risk for pregnancy toxemia. And that's because pregnancy toxemia happens when a goat does not get enough protein in her diet to be able to continue building these babies. And so she winds up getting toxemia. So protein is really important at the end of pregnancy. So why on earth would an overweight goat be at risk? Well, because if she has a lot of internal fat, she simply can't eat enough to be able to nourish her kids. So it's very interesting how you've got that little double-edged sword there with the underweight or overweight for goats. The next thing is you want to make sure that your doe does not have a problem with parasites before you breed her. With an adult that's old enough to be bred, when we say parasites, we are most likely talking about worms. Coccidia is typically a problem with kids from 3 weeks to 5 months of age. By the time a goat is old enough to be bred, she should be immune to coccidia at that point. So you want to make sure that she doesn't have a problem with worms, though. So you definitely want to do the 5-point check. I have a podcast on the 5-point check. But basically, it means the first thing is you want to check her FOMACHA score. Make sure it is a 1 or a 2. You want to check her body condition, which we were just talking about. So that's going to hopefully be right about a 3. Make sure she does not have bottle jaw, which is swelling that goes from the jaw to the chin, which looks kind of like a baby bottle there, which is why they call it bottle jaw. That her coat is in good condition, and that she is pooping pebbles, not dog logs, not diarrhea, pebbles. And usually when a goat has a problem with barber pole worm, you've got anemia, poor body condition, and dog log poops. If it's another worm, you're more likely to see diarrhea and poor body condition. And I've got a 7-hour parasite class that goes into that a lot more. So just know that your goat really needs to pass the 5-point check before you breed her, because you don't want to have a pregnant goat that needs to be treated for worms. And again, you're getting into resource allocation, and it's not going to be good for the mom or the babies if she is trying to grow babies and fight parasites at the same time. That's a really big ask for her body. So you definitely, so to kind of sum up with the does, you definitely do not want to breed them when they're too young or too small, or with poor body condition, which could be caused either by underfeeding, incorrectly feeding, or worms. Now let's talk about bucks. A lot of people think that, well, bucks just know what to do. You just throw them in there, they do it. You don't really need to worry about them. However, age and weight are very important for your bucks. Also, you do not, because there are problems with fertility if your buck is too young or too old. I have had one buck go sterile when he was 8 years old, and it was incredibly sad because he was unfortunately my favorite buck of the whole 23 years that I've been breeding goats. And so I was really sad. And I did not want to admit defeat. The does were not getting pregnant, and I kept putting him back in there. And after about 3 months, I realized, like, yeah, he has not gotten a single goat pregnant this fall. So I need to just call it quits. Now, I wish I had known at that time that a really part of a buck breeding soundness exam is to measure the scrotum. And when I learned that, which I learned from Dr. Stewart from Virginia Tech on a podcast that we did about bucks during breeding season. So we got a whole podcast. It's like 30, 40 minutes talking about bucks in depth during breeding season. And she talks about a lot of reasons in there why bucks might not be able to breed or might not get does pregnant. But I'm just going to cover like some of the big basic stuff here. And that is that if your buck is not old enough or too old. And so when they're young, it's a little bit, the size of the scrotum is not going to be as helpful as when they're old. So really what we should all be doing is measuring our buck's scrotums and keeping track of that, just like we keep track of everything else. And because one of the things that happens when they go sterile is that their scrotum will shrink. And that was something that I noticed. Not only did his scrotum shrink, but he also stopped stinking. And so if I had known that ahead of time, and I was measuring it, and, that first month, like, oh, he bred 5 or 6 does, they didn't get pregnant. At that point, I could have saved myself a couple months of agony by just measuring his scrotum and going, oh my goodness, this is like a lot smaller than it was last year. So he's probably sterile now. Because unfortunately, the majority of the shrinkage happened after breeding season. If it had happened earlier, and especially when he stopped stinking, that would have been a big clue. Like, oh, he's really not a virile buck anymore. So this also means be careful about buying unregistered bucks, because somebody could sell you a really old buck who's not able to breed anymore. And they're just trying to get them out of their barn. So the next thing, so for the younger bucks, then, there is a lot of misinformation going around. I know there are lots of people on social media who will tell you that they had a, 2 or 3 month old buck go pregnant. And I always ask for DNA evidence on this, and no one has ever been able to provide me with DNA evidence that a 2 or 3 month old buck actually got a doe pregnant. Yes, I know they look like they know what they're doing. But if you've ever changed a baby boy's diaper, you know that they're able to extend like a young buck, and it doesn't mean that they are producing sperm. So there's a lot of stuff going on there that doesn't mean anything about fertility. What did happen on our farm was a few years ago when I was on a book tour in the fall. It was 6 months or 6 weeks. I was gone for 6 weeks. And when I got back, I found 4 bucks in my doe pen. And I, 5 months later, 16 does gave birth, and I had no idea who the sire was. So that meant I did DNA testing on all of them. Those 4 bucks that were in the buck pen, one of them was 5 months old. The other 3 were 4 months old. And out of about 35, 40 kids, every single kid was sired by the 5-month-old. The 4-month-olds got no one pregnant. Even though like that's who clued me in. Like when I got home and I walked out into the pasture, I saw a 4-month-old mating a doe. Now this does not mean that you should let your 4-month-olds run around with your does, because that is definitely playing with fire, knowing that 5-month-olds can for sure get goats pregnant. But it also means don't think that you're going to use a 3-month-old, because I have known people who've tried. I have known people who believe like, oh, a 3-month-old is old enough to breed, and they've tried. So there's that. I don't know anyone who has ever like purposely like put a doe with a 3-month-old, and that they were able to get pregnant. So, and a lot of times when people have told me that a younger buck had gotten a goat pregnant, sometimes when they check their records, they're like, oh, he was actually 5 months old. I thought he was 3 months old. So it's really important, if you don't know who the sire is, whenever you have bucks escape, it's really important to do DNA testing. There are a lot of goats that there are a lot of little guys who've been blamed for stuff that they didn't do. And I know people who've had papers pulled on goats when they started doing DNA testing, because they're like, oh, that's not that buck's kid, because it was wrong. So make sure that your bucks, so again, with the buck's weight, you want to make sure that they are in good condition. You want to do the FAMACHA check with them and the 5-point check. Check the eyelids, check the body condition, make sure they're pooping pebbles, make sure that their coat looks good so that they're not dealing with any external parasites, and that they do not have bottle jaw. And they may at some point during breeding season, if they start to lose condition, you might need to start giving them a little bit of goat feed. And I want to stress goat feed, because every goat feed that I have seen does have the calcium and phosphorus balanced, unlike balanced 2-to-1, twice as much calcium as phosphorus, unlike just straight grain. So like, don't give them a little bit of corn or something like that, because corn is like 15 parts phosphorus to 1 part calcium. So it is inversed and astronomically higher in phosphorus than it should be. And so that's the kind of thing that can cause struvite stones. We've got a whole article on struvite stones on the website, and I shared it last week in our live stream. So you don't want to give them just plain grain. The goat feeds, read the label though, because I know I haven't seen every label, but every label I have seen does say that it's balanced 2-to-1 calcium to phosphorus. So be sure to check that so that you're not at risk for struvite stones. Because what happens is a lot of people think, oh, I have to give them alfalfa to balance. But it's like, no, it's already balanced. And really trying to balance plain grains. You're like, oh, okay, well, I'll buy oats and alfalfa. No, because the problem with alfalfa is that it's high in calcium. Struvite stones is just one kind of stone. There's multiple kinds of stones. Feeding them alfalfa can cause calcium stones because alfalfa is so high in calcium. So it's really important that their calcium and phosphorus are balanced to prevent struvite stones, but also that they don't get too much calcium, because too much calcium is going to cause calcium stones. So definitely do not overfeed them with the goat feed either, because it should be short term, just until breeding season is over or until their body condition has improved. And so usually that's not very long. Like once they're done breeding, it shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 weeks for their body condition to improve and get back to normal. Let me check the comments again because I see. So we've got some, Amy, one of my team members, has been posting some links in the chat, or well, it is the chat if you're live, but in the comment section so that you can see some of those things. And Lori says, where do you measure the scrotum? I would measure both the length, so from like where it attaches to the body to the bottom, and then also the circumference. And so you would need something, like a tape measure that somebody uses who sews to do the circumference. And then write that down and make sure that it does not start shrinking as they get older. Some bucks can remain virile forever, but it's not guaranteed. So, and hello to everybody who's just been saying hi in the chat. It's great to have you all here. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are heat cycles and timing of the breeding. So the signs of a doe in heat would be, one of the big ones is, they call it flagging. If you have a dog, you would call it wagging. But for some reason with goats, they have to have their own special names and they call it flagging. And it is a lot. Like you might think like, oh, my doe, like, oh, well, she flags, she wags her tail. Normally they'll be like, that, like maybe to get a fly off of it or something, or if they're happy, maybe a little bit. But when they're in heat, it is just like nonstop like this. And in fact, when they're in our milking parlor, it feels like there's a fan on with some of them because they're flagging so excessively. So that is frequently when we know that we have a doe in heat, is that if we are milking her and she's in the milking parlor and she's just flagging nonstop. And then the other thing too is that she might be in a really bad mood. So, this normally compliant goat that jumps up on the milk stand, eats her grain quietly while you're milking her, she may suddenly just be standing there refusing to eat her grain, staring at you, like looking around at you, like she's not happy with you. And then so a lot of times people get worried then and they're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with her? Is she sick? And it's like, no, it sounds like she's in heat. Another sign is vocalizing. And this can get crazy. If you have goats in town, or even just, if you've got like a couple of acres in the country and so you've got neighbors that are not that far away, some does will scream so loud and it sounds like a woman screaming. I know multiple people who have had the police show up at their house because somebody called the police and said there's a woman screaming at this house. And it's a goat. It's a goat in heat. It's like she just wants a boyfriend. And, that's the idea, is like, I'm going to scream so that bucks within earshot are going to hear me and come find me. And this can be really bad for people who live in the city. There was a lady who bought a doe and a wether from me a number of years ago. And she was supposed to breed the doe. And for whatever reason, she didn't. And so every 3 weeks, this goat was coming into heat and screaming bloody murder. And then one day she called me and said, I have to get rid of my goats right now. I'm going to be fined $100 a day for every day after 7 days that they're still here because they're in violation of the noise ordinance. So not every goat is going to do that. Some goat, in fact, there's even people refer to it as a silent heat. Sometimes a silent heat can be caused by a copper deficiency or a selenium deficiency, but not always. So don't immediately go, oh, I've got a mineral deficiency. It's just something to be aware of. Like all of these are possibilities, like I wouldn't like, oh, she's flagging, but she's not making any noise, so she can't be in heat. That's not true. Some goats are just more quiet than others. You may or may not see mucus discharge. So mucus discharge is, so if you see, flagging, she is in such a wicked mood. And this is the other thing too. I actually I had a goat. She lived to be 15. And one time when she was like 12 or 13 years old, well retired, she came into heat and was in such a mood. And this old lady goat was out there trying to beat up every other doe in the pen. And we had an intern at the time, and he came in and said, "What's wrong with Star?" And I look out there and I saw her, because her hair was standing on end and she just kept rearing up and butting heads with everybody. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's in heat. We just need to lock her up. Like, she's too old for this kind of nonsense. I don't want her to get hurt trying to butt heads with these goats that are half her age. So you will have some goats like that. They're just butting heads with everybody. In fact, I have seen people on social media think that their goat was constipated because it was walking around with its back arched, its hair on end, and beating up everybody. And it's like, no, she's not constipated. She's just in heat and she's in a bad mood because she wants a boyfriend now. This is one of the things too. Speaking of those bad moods, if I have a young buck who has never bred a doe before, I like to put him with a young doe who's never been bred before, because she doesn't know what to expect. So she just stands there. And so that is the biggest sign of a goat in heat, is standing heat. Standing heat means the goat just stands there and lets the buck mount her. If she's not in heat, when he tries to mount her, she runs. The thing with experienced does, however, is that some of them, it's like, they want to be bred now. And they get very angry if you've got like a 5 or 6 month old buck in there who's like, mounting on the ribs, mounting on the head, like all this kind of stuff. And we have actually removed a buck from a breeding pen because we were afraid that the doe was going to hurt him, because a mature doe is like 60 to 70 pounds. And if it's a 5 or 6 month old buck, he's probably 10 to 20 pounds less than her. So she can really hurt him and it can take him some time. And so if it's a doe that's never been bred, like I said, they just stand there. They have no idea what's supposed to happen. So they just stand there because that's what their instincts are telling them to do. Do not hold a goat if she's running away, because a goat is in heat for somewhere between 24 and 48 hours. And early on, she's not going to be in standing heat. So initially what you might see is that she's vocalizing, she's flagging, and maybe she's got a little bit of discharge, but she won't stand for the buck. Try again in a few hours, because if they're not in standing heat, they're not going to get pregnant. Another question that some people ask is, how many does can a buck breed? Now, I have seen people, like huge meat goat herds, talk about having one buck for like every 50 does or 100 does. And I don't know how they do that. Like, I think I'm assuming that they have goats kidding for multiple months, because what I've seen, and I've talked about this with some other, I think mostly Nigerian breeders, is that most bucks they look like they're breeding a doe, but their sperm production just isn't happening fast enough, and it doesn't get high enough for them to actually get more than 2 does pregnant in a day. And so I try to limit, if I have more than 2 does come into heat, I try to make sure I'm using a different buck for the third one, because I hate missing a month. It's like, I want you to be kidding in 5 months. And so I don't want to miss a month. And I don't want to risk her not getting pregnant. Another thing I want to say too about when to breed your goats is that a lot of Nigerian breeders are, people who are new to Nigerians think, oh, I'm going to breed my Nigerians in February or March. And that could be a mistake, because that information, nothing online ever dies. When I got goats in 2002, it was more true. Even then we knew like not 100% of them are going to come into heat year round. But we did, in the early years, I did have goats give birth every single month of the year at various times. The last time I had an off-season kidding was at least 12 years ago. I don't see my goats coming into heat off season anymore. And my theory is that the longer these goats are out of Africa and the farther north they are, the more they become seasonal breeders, because ovulating has to do with how much light is coming into the eye. And so normally, as your days are getting shorter, that's when the goats start ovulating, because that would mean that they're going to kid in the spring when the growing season is starting and the temperatures are warming up. And so it's a much better time in nature for goats to have babies in spring than in fall. It seems most of the people that have the most luck with off-season breeding with Nigerians, and then some like pygmies and kinders, are people who live down south, like Texas, Florida, Arizona, California, Southern California. The farther south they are, the more luck that they have with that. So don't wait too long into the season to breed them. I really like to make sure everybody gets bred by the end of the year. November if possible, but December for sure. Let me check on the questions again. So Samantha asked, would it be better to give a buck a small amount of goat grain daily during his 6 weeks of breeding to prevent weight loss, or should I wait until he has already lost weight and then feed him? I would be checking his body condition regularly, which I know is not fun because bucks are stinky, but running your hands down his body so that you know what feels normal for him. And we're not talking about waiting until he's skin and bones, So like just when you feel like he's starting to lose a little weight is when you could start giving him some, so that he doesn't lose any more and maybe even gains back what he has lost already. Lori asked, are you giving bucks loose minerals throughout the year? Yes, they definitely, because you don't want to be playing catch up close to breeding season. So you want to make sure that they are getting a loose mineral that is has at least 1700 ppm copper, 50 ppm selenium, and then 4 times as much zinc, at least 4 times as much zinc as copper, because the copper and zinc need to be in a 4-to-1 ratio with 4 times as much zinc. Sweet Licks has that. But I'm not aware of anything else nationally that is available now that has those levels. So a lot of the minerals out there have less copper than that, less selenium than that, and not a lot of zinc either. And those are the really important ones for fertility. Silverado Sandy said, because of Ohio's drought, my vet has me feeding hay and have my goats and dog runs on cement to eat. I am half through breeding and worried about treating the pregnant does for parasites. Okay, actually, if you're a dog run sounds like a dry lot. So if they're on a dry lot, they shouldn't have parasites. That is one of the great, that's one of the benefits of dry lots, is that you don't have worm problems. Worms need grass to infect the goat. Hopefully you're using a hay feeder. You're not feeding hay on the ground. Now, if you're feeding hay on the ground, that could be a problem. But if you're using hay feeders, then, and they're on a dry lot, then that should be fine. You shouldn't have any problems. And remember, you want to do the 5-point check to make sure that they don't have a problem. And the ones that you would not use during pregnancy are valbazen and levamisole. If you look at the research and stuff and get really strict about it, valbazen should not be used in the first trimester. Levamisole should not be used in the third trimester. However, most people just want to be safe and say, I'm just not going to use either one of those at all during pregnancy. Safeguard, ivermectin, and Cydectin are all safe to use orally. Michelle said Oberhausley's are very quiet. I've heard that. That is one of the things that Oberhausley owners love about them. I know one of the Nigerian breeders that I knew way back at the beginning also had Oberhausley, and he said if an Oberhausley is making noise, you know something is wrong, like because they're one of the quietest breeds. So, Samantha says she has one boar buck. Whoa. Cool. All right. So your boar is you're not guilty. This is cool. You have one boar buck. He gets 60 does pregnant all within a month. Cool. That's awesome. So it does happen. I have not known a whole lot of meat breeders, but I know I've heard them say that like one buck can handle 50 to 100 does. And then Mama Blessings Carrington says, do you personally vaccinate prior to breeding? Would you be able to talk about the steps you take prior to breeding? So typically, no one vaccinates prior to breeding. The only vaccine that is routinely recommended for goats is CDT, which is for enterotoxemia type C and type D, and then tetanus, Clostridium type C and D, which causes enterotoxemia. And that's weird, but that's what it is. Because tetanus is also a Clostridium. So that's why they put those three together, because you've got Clostridium type C and D and tetanus. And then the Clostridium type C and D are what cause enterotoxemia, which is a horrible intestinal disease that has really no cure. And so typically what people do is they vaccinate their does for that 3 or 4 weeks before they're due to kid, so that the level will be high for the kids when the kids are born. It will cross the placenta and the kids will be born with some level of protection against those diseases until they're old enough to be vaccinated. So that would be the timing of vaccines and breeding. And so I think that took care of all the questions. And then was that? All right. The next part we have is common pitfalls. And then I just saw another question pop up. Samantha said, we're in Oregon with mild weather. We also breed in September when the weather just starts to cool. So we set them up for success. We also use bucks that are at least a year old. 10 years of good luck. Awesome. That's great. So yeah, September is a nice time to breed. Although in Illinois, that means we would have January babies, which is not nice on the other end. So we quit doing that. So I'm totally fine with the fact that my goats are not usually coming into heat until October at the earliest. Common pitfalls. Breeding does that are too young or underweight. So if they're too young or too small or underweight from parasites or whatever, those are all going to set you up for problems 5 months from now. You don't want to overfeed your bucks with goat feed or alfalfa because of the risk of urinary calculi. The other thing is misreading heat cycles and missing breedings. So I used to have the ideal setup. My computer was right in front of a window that looked out into the pasture. And so, like there was a window right there. And so I would be sitting at my computer working and I could watch the goats right there. And it was great. But we no longer have that because I wound up with problems in my neck and back. And so I had to get a desk that I could stand. And so that meant I couldn't be in front of that window anymore. And so it's been much harder to catch goats in heat when I don't have my eyes on them all day long. So we do rotational breeding, but we would always plan it so that for breeding, by the time we got to breeding season, that it would be time for that to have that pen again. So misreading heat cycles can be a problem though, because sometimes people think a goat is in heat when she's not. And then she keeps running away from the buck. Well, if she's running away from the buck, that's a pretty good sign that she's 99%, she's not going to get pregnant, even if he happens to get lucky, because some bucks are very tenacious and some of them do get lucky. But they don't get lucky more than once. Like they sneak up on a doe that's eating or something and manage to breed her. And then she bolts and then she doesn't take her eyes off of him and he does not get lucky again. But I've had people contact me and say, my goat is like at day 155 and she hasn't gone into labor yet. What should I do? And I said, well, are you sure she's bred? And then sometimes I will get an answer like, oh yeah, my husband held her while the buck bred her. Well, she's probably not bred then, because if somebody had to hold her, then she was not in standing heat, and standing heat is what you need for goats to be bred. And some people think that they need to interfere in their goats' lives a lot more than they really do. And when it comes to breeding, bucks are professionals. Like they know, as long as they've done it before, the first time it can be very comical as they try to figure out how to do it. But once they've done it, they know what they're doing and they do a great job. And you want to make sure, and once is not enough. I don't think I've ever seen a study on this, but as I'm saying this now, I'm like, whoa, I should see if I could find a study, because maybe somebody did this. But I just know I have had so many people through the years who've said that, oh, well, he bred her and then we took her out. And 5 months later, she did not have a baby or two. And from the very beginning, like everybody, when I got started, people were all on the Yahoo groups back then. And everybody just knew like, oh yeah, he needs to do it at least 4 or 5 times. And so do not assume that once is enough, and don't hold your doe to be bred. And unless, I don't know that anybody has shared this. I have a free breeding course at goatacademy.net, and there are videos in there. I don't want the videos on here because YouTube has a thing about animal breeding videos. And I don't want to get my video, I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube. I know there's videos out there, but I also know people who've had problems with them. So there's videos in my course at the goatacademy.net, and I will give you a link to that. Right here. I'll put it in the comment section so you can sign up for it. And this is a free course. Oh, there it is. There you go. Mama Blessings Carrington said, how long would you keep a buck and doe together to ensure breeding is a success? So what I do is I put the buck and the doe together in a stall in the barn when I know. So I know she's in heat. She's mounting the other does. The other does are mounting her, and she's flagging and all the signs. And so I put her in a stall. I go get the buck that I want to use, put him in there with her. And I want to see one good breeding. so that I know that she's really in heat. And once I see one good breeding, then I go inside and I mark the calendar for 145 days and start looking for an udder then about at around 135 days to make sure that she is actually bred. And when I say an udder at 135 days, I mean it's probably going to be small unless she's a really fabulous milker, in which case it could be really big. But you always mark the calendar for when it looks like a goat was bred, because you don't want to get surprised. We got surprised a few times in the early years, and it's not always fun. You know, sometimes it's cool. You walk out there and there's like happy babies bouncing around. Other times you walk out there and it's not, you don't walk into a happy scene. So, and you don't always know that it's not happy. One time we had a goat that gave birth unexpectedly in the middle of summer because it was like she kept coming into heat. So here's another interesting scenario. Sometimes people contact me and they'll say, I bred my goat 3 weeks ago, but it looks like she's in heat again. What should I do? And my answer is, well, if you want her to have babies, you breed her again, because she may or may not have gotten pregnant. If she's coming into heat again, she probably did not get pregnant, so you need to breed her again. However, it is possible that she got pregnant and she just keeps coming into heat, even though she's not ovulating anymore. She's not going to carry multiple pregnancies. And I know that's another popular Facebook myth, that, you know, like a goat has like a tiny little 2-pound baby and a 3-pound baby, and somebody says, oh, well, one of them, it was because she got bred twice. No, it's just because there was a poor placental connection for the little kid. I have had goats have a tiny kid along with 2 or 3 normal size kids when they were never bred more than once. So it happens. There's a very logical, scientifically sound explanation for that. And the chances of a goat having a double pregnancy are like, that doesn't happen. They've done it. They have done it experimentally. They forced a cow to get a second pregnancy, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen naturally with goats. So if you want to have babies in 5 months, then you need to breed the goat again. So I think that is it. I don't see any more questions right now. And the key takeaways for tonight are, first of all, if you've been around following me for very long, you know how much I stress the importance of good nutrition. If you get nutrition wrong, you are going to be in for a world of heartache, because there are so many problems that are caused by nutritional issues. And when a goat is pregnant is like the most important time of all, for the nutrition to be really good. And if your animals are healthy and well conditioned, then they will be more likely to get pregnant and to carry that pregnancy to term, to carry all of those pregnancies to term. Because one of the crazy things about goats is that one kid, like if she's carrying 3 or 4, one kid can die in utero and the others keep going. And you don't know that until the goat gives birth. And then the goat gives birth to 4 kids. And one of them is this teeny tiny, gross looking little mummified kid that died 3 months ago. It's like the size of a hot dog, only weighs like 3 ounces. In our kidding course, we've got a video that we've got videos and pictures of mummified kids. So timing is really important. So make sure that you understand the signs of heat. Again, in the free breeding course, we shared the link in the comments. The free breeding course has got videos of what it looks like when a doe is in heat. There's also videos of what it looks like when a goat has had a successful breeding, because there will be times when a buck climbs on top and then just falls off after not doing anything. But if he has successfully bred her, she'll arch her back. And so that's how you know that it's been successful. And there's multiple videos in the breeding course that show you how that looks. And then, as with everything else, I'm always saying, you know, prevention is like the most important thing. Do not raise your goats on defense, because that is a really painful way to do it. I'm not a big sports person, but I know they say the best the best defense is a good offense. And that is definitely what you want to do with your goats, is to make sure that you've got everything, you're doing all of the things you can to ensure the best possible outcomes, rather than just thinking like, oh, well, they're goats, they've been breeding since the beginning of time, we'll just put them out there in the pasture, and when they get pregnant, they get pregnant, and, you know, it'll all be good. The big problem, I am not a fan of pen breeding. I know a lot of people do it, but I like to be able to plan my life. So I like to know, I like to have a 5-day window for my goats. Like, oh, I know this goat's going to give birth, you know, between March 15th and March 20th. So if I need to go out of town, I will go out of town before or after that. I'm not going to go between, you know, the 15th and the 20th, because I know that somebody could give birth at that time. And not that I think that there's going to be a real problem that's going to require any kind of heroic measures, but just simply, you know, making sure that the kid is on its feet and nursing and getting an appropriate amount of colostrum and weighing it so that we can track its weight to make sure that it gains weight appropriately and all that kind of stuff. So if you're watching this later, you've got any questions, feel free to post in the comment section below, and we'll get back to you. Next Monday night, same time, 7 p.m. Central, we will be doing our talk number 3 on breeding season, and that is going to be all about pregnancy. So I will talk to you guys next week. Bye for now.